We need to look at missions differently today because the world has changed. The gospel doesn't change. The Great Commission doesn't change. The Word of God doesn't change. But to borrow a term from Harvey Kahn, my missions mentor, there's an eternal word, but changing worlds. And we need to recognize that our world has changed over the last 2 centuries. I think we need to define missions more biblically than geographically. And there's a reason why we tend to define missions geographically. We've become blind to the changes that have happened since the late 20th century. We need to remember that the 19th and 20th centuries were a time of colonialism by the West. That has changed now. Missions were conducted during the 19th and 20th century as the West going to the rest. But today, that is no longer the case. Western missionaries left their home cultures to go overseas, and so we began to define missions as going overseas. But today, you don't need to go overseas to be a missionary. You can be a missionary without ever defining missions geographically. If we define missions biblically, we can not be blind to the colonialism of the context of the 19th and 20th centuries. When missionaries in the 19th and 20th centuries went overseas, in the colonial era, governments in the West sometimes talked about civilizing or even Christianizing the rest of the world. But those weren't the only motives. There were also commercial interests. And so it was not uncommon for Western military power to protect not only the merchants, but also the missionaries. And that, for example, in China, created huge resentment to the so-called foreign devils who had come to China from the colonial powers. And sadly, the missionaries were often perceived as entangled in that colonial self-interested expansion. I remember when I visited the city of Nanjing, I was in a bookstore and saw a rack of books on religion in China, and they were translated into English. And I came across for the first time a very popular expression in China that Buddha had come to China on the back of a white elephant, but Jesus Christ had flown into China on cannonballs.